Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today for this session. No ordinary disruption. My name is Cyril Lachèvre. I'm a macroeconomics editor at L'Opinion, a French newspaper. While everybody is taking seat, let me just take the opportunity to remind you that we are counting on you for this roundtable. I mean that you are here also to ask questions and very brilliant or funny questions. This is regarding to you, but anyway, questions because we have very distinguished speakers and they are here to answer you. You have two ways to ask questions or make comments. Don't hesitate, but not on sports, but on the rest, it's okay. So via the web, maybe you are familiar with it. Sorry, but I have to tell you once again. So you go to the application and think it will be written, or it's on your table. So you go to the application Wisely and you enter a comment or question, or you can do it via Twitter. And remember that we are hashtag OECD free because we are in the third amphitheater. So now that everything is settled, let me just in a few words try to explain why this subject is the most important subject of today's panel, because we are going to speak not only about data government, about cyber securities, but more in general about the world tomorrow and how to couple with it regarding when you are managing a collectivity, a local authority, a government, or a company, and that you have to deal with these Internet of Things revolution. Some few words, some figures that are being brought by the OECD and by the experts. I think it's me. Yeah. Okay. If you trying to combine Internet of Things with big data and analytics, you could have an incremental revenue of $14.5 trillion, which could make between 10 and 15 trillion that could add to the global GDP, which, as I remind you, represents 1/3 of the global world GDP. So it's something enormous we are talking about when we speak about Internet of Things and more general about data. 94% of the businesses that have used Internet of Things have seen a positive return on their investment. So there is no question on whether we should or not develop these kind of applications. But it's okay. But as you see, just 17% of the software developers are already working on applications for IoT, Internet of Things devices, and 23% say that they expect to do such work in the next 6 months, which shows you how quickly this revolution is coming. Just a couple of other figures. The Internet of Things is expected to create 100 zettabytes of data per year in China alone by 2030. 1 zettabyte is 1,000 exabytes, for those of you who are familiar with this. But just to give you a better idea of what it represents, in 2006, all the computers around the world had 500 exabytes, which means 1/2 of 1 zettabyte, which means that we are going to do something like multiplication by 200 in the next 30 years, just speaking about China. And to end up with this, because of the Internet of Things, there will be 22 points more data traffic by 2020. To end it, and this will launch our discussion, of course, as you can imagine, it represents huge security risks. Never forget that now everything can be a threat. Industry, we have seen it a few weeks ago with a lot of industries, the French industry, that were affected by a virus. But maybe all this happening at the time being is being a minority when you talk about retail people, for example, working in the retail industry, not telling everything about what is happening to their own security. cars that will be normally automated in the next years is huge risks. Video cameras, they can be exploited. I will speak about cyber warfare, which is the next threat. But you can imagine everything, even though, as you see at point number 8, very important, medical devices now can be the next threat. So when you talk about hospitals and all wealth, then this is huge opportunities for our wealth, because Internet of Things, of course, are used mainly with individuals to improve their health, but it can be also a source of danger. For example, people that have pacemakers. I will end up with positive news. We got the chance in my newspaper to have been invited by Estonia, which is saying they say that they are the coolest digital society, which means the first entirely e-state. 99% of Estonian people, which makes 1.3 million citizens, have a completely connected relation with their states. And it's something impressive, because they told us that it makes the administration to not waste the control of waste, to an economy of every month they can of an economy of papers. I'm sorry, my English is not that good. Around 300 meters, like the Eiffel Tower, that can be saved every month in papers. But more important, what is very interesting, and it will launch our discussion, is that the Estonian state is having a huge reflection on how to protect their data, and are not negotiating with other states, for instance the Luxembourg, so that the Luxembourg can become a kind of a back door for them, a back to keep all their data in case they are the Estonian state is being hacked. So I hope this would have introduced our discussion. Now let me present you, because they are the one that will speak, and I will just pass them the microphone. Our distinguished speakers. I would start with Isabelle Falk-Pierrotin, who is the president of the CNIL in France. The CNIL is la Commission Nationale Informatique and Liberty, which regulates to make sure that the citizens are well protected in France regarding all the data. Jacob Bunsgaard, sorry if I don't, it's good, thank you. My English not that good, as I told you. Mayor of Aarhus in Denmark, you will explain us what you are making to digitalize all your citizen life. On the left of Isabelle, it's Christophe Steck, Director Public Policy and Internet of Telefonica. On your left, Richard Dobbs, Director of McKinsey, member of McKinsey Global Institute Council. And on the exact left, Diego Piacentini, I'm right? My Italian's not that good, no? Thank you. And you are the Government Commissioner for the Digital Agenda in Italy. We are going to start with you, Diego, if you mind, with a very simple question. What are you doing with the Italian government regarding all these big and huge questions?
So, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I need to give a little bit of context of my experience, because I've been working with Apple for 13 years and most recently with Amazon for 16. I'm actually on a leave of absence to help the Italian government for a couple of years, and leading this new team, which is running the digital transformation. And we just recently launched the first Italian digital transformation plan, which for the first time has also been signed by the Prime Minister, giving huge political support to that. One of the first people that I hired was actually our cybersecurity expert. Not because we are the agency in charge of cybersecurity, but because any digital transformation cannot stay separate from cybersecurity processes. And I must say that the first observation I made, I'm in this job for 8 months now, was, and obviously this is about the Italian experience, although I know that some other countries are in the same situation, is although there are in government processes and procedures for about pretty much everything, they're not really good established processes for basic security approaches. I mean, we've seen security breaches because some government websites had the username admin and password admin. Well, you're laughing, but unfortunately, it is the situation. We still haven't, and we need to do it. What I've noticed is that, especially with the new undertaking of the European directive, there's been an incredibly well sophisticated and organized set of processes for reacting to crisis, but we're still missing some basic information, basic processes to prevent the crisis. And again, and I'm not even talking about backdoor, how to get into encryption. I'm talking about basic processes for government employees to use software applications. I mean, we need to get to the point where I cannot use this software application I have until I have a digital signature, and until the username and password is not being changed. I receive repetitive emails about changing it. I mean, the boring stuff that everybody should be doing, and it needs to be pervasive, because obviously if there is only one weak spot in the chain, that's where the bad guys are going to get in. That's the number one point, but I would stop here for this because I have other points to make it along the conversation.
Thank you very much, Diego. Before I turn to you, Jacob Boonsgaard, Mayor of Aarhus, I just have to tell you that we are being asked some questions on Weasenbly. I don't know if they are being put on the screen. Maybe if I have to touch this. No. There will be a question. Do you feel confident that your government is up to the task of securing the Internet of Things? And you will take time maybe to answer this question. Yeah, thank you. So you go to Weasenbly.com, and then if you could answer this question during our conversation, it will help the debate. So I'm turning to you, Jacob. Just tell us in a few words what are the main things that you are doing in your city regarding all these data relationship with the citizens.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, just a few words of context. The city of Aarhus is the second largest city in Denmark. It's a university city, a lot of young people there. High awareness of the possibilities of the digital world. So in many ways we've worked in sort of trying to reap the benefits of becoming more and more digitalized. And obviously we believe that the benefits of I mean, going down that path it's much more beneficial than the risks that are there, but obviously they also needs to be taken into account. So what we've done is we've created a organization, sort of a matrix organizations called Smart Aarhus. We were trying to combine the efforts from private companies, government agencies, and the ordinary citizens in order to push for sort of utilizing some of the opportunities that are there in terms of digitalization. In Denmark, we have every citizen have a digital signature. So in many ways, we have been able to move over to a completely digital communications between the citizens and the municipality and the different agencies that we have. So that has pushed for saving a lot of energy in administration and bureaucracy. But obviously, this also raises the question of security, and we look at it in a number of different ways. Obviously, on a systemic side, where the systems that we are using needs to be secure and thought through, and the processes need to be in place. And this is both in a matter of the sort of having thought through the processes on the technical side, but also on the competencies of the employees using the software and the systems, and also on the other hand, making sure that our citizens have the necessary competencies and understanding of some of the basic security issues that needs to be addressed when you are online. And we try to do that in a way where we both raise the level of competencies in general, both for elderly people through some of the civic society organizations that are helping raise the competencies, doing workshops for old people, but also in our schools trying to implement sort of a basic understanding of what you need to be aware of when you are online. And the next step will be a lot of workshops and town hall meetings addressing this issue, because when we ask the citizens, about 1/4, 25% of the citizens are very concerned or concerned about the security online, and therefore we need to address this. And when we look at the numbers, about 1/3 of all the crimes committed online. Digital crimes are committed against 18 to 23 years old. So it's not just a matter of old people not understanding what to do on the online. It's actually young people that are not aware of how to protect themselves when they go online. So we try to raise the competencies and doing sort of basic community outreach work on this issue.
Thank you, Diego. Just I'm turning to you, Diego, because I was looking at you shaking your head. What is happening in Italy? How do you educate people? Maybe you have the same question, because in France, for example, we are not really educated to this for the time being.
As I mentioned, so far the major effort has been put on how to manage crisis. I mean, the new reforms of the CERT. The role of the secret services and everything has been, as I said, is incredibly sophisticated. We need to start by, I was nodding because I thought all those were basic great ideas. We need to start, taking public employees. Now I'm focused on government, but obviously the same thing translates to private life. I mean, I would like to ask here and raise your hands, how many of you use your second level of authentication for your email? If you don't use the second level authentication, so I would say 30%. If you don't use your second level authentication, believe me, sooner or later you're going to get breached. And those are all basic processes that need to be taught. Definitely government has to do it for their own employees, and every company had to do it for their own employees. That my former companies were doing this as a regular practice every 6 months. And it's, as I said, I'm not surprised 18 to 23 years old, because who's an 18 to 23-year-old who's doing anything boring? And security prevention is boring, is being repetitive about processes.
Turning to you, Richard. Richard Upstott, director of McKinsey, at McKinsey, sorry. What are the biggest opportunities, because we are speaking about security at the time being, but there is also a huge opportunities to change this, to make these data useful for everybody. And just take 1 second, please continue to answer the questions. You have been so far answering it, but I'll take the answer at the end. Thank you.
Well, I mean, we have to remember, governments have a mini crisis brewing or a major crisis brewing. And this isn't about cybersecurity. There's a much bigger crisis they have. They have a fiscal gap. We look at the picture going forward on the current trends with aging, governments are going to have 3-4 trillion fiscal gap. They have a delivery gap. I can download Uber as an app, set it up, and be in an Uber car in 15 minutes. That is my expectation as a citizen. Why does it take me 5 hours to do my taxes? You know, that is not acceptable now. So there's a delivery gap. And finally, there's a trust gap. And part of the trust gap comes from the fiscal problem, governments having to squeeze money out. Part of the trust gap comes from the delivery. If I think that they're that incompetent in terms of asking me my name and address 10 times for 10 different departments, how can I necessarily think that they're competent at that? But part of it is, trust is falling across the board. So, we have government have a big problem. Now, the good news is when we look at how governments can address this, technology, particularly digital and data, but a few other functional capabilities too, actually can help close the gap. Our estimate is if we look around the world, the difference between the improvement of the good governments versus the bad governments, if everyone could get up to the same level of improvement as good governments, by 2022 we will have closed the fiscal gap. Now, you could decide to spend it more on services and keep the fiscal gap, but getting better at doing stuff is there. The trust gap, you know, there are companies that have closed the trust gap. The millennials don't trust people. They don't trust companies, they don't trust governments, they don't trust even their doctor. They will not go and follow their doctor's advice until they've read a peer-reviewed paper written by their doctor. But the millennials will quite happily, this is an untrusting generation, leave the key to their house under a doormat and have a total stranger they've never met spend the weekend in their house when they're not there. Because they trust them because they have a good Airbnb rating. So think about it, you know, technology allows us to rebuild trust in ways. You know, we trust Amazon ratings and we trust Amazon reviews. So we know there are ways that you can use technology to close the gap. So, you know, there is an opportunity, and also, you know, technology can change it. In the UK, in 2 years' time, completing the tax return should be doable within about 15 minutes, because all the data will be pre-populated. And I know in Denmark you already have that. But you know, there are ways of doing it, so you can do that. So I think that technology can do it. Now, yes, we're going to have to deal with the security concerns. Yes, we have to deal with some of the deep privacy concerns. And some of that prize I talked about is going to come on using data in a way to reduce fraud and error across governments. And you know, fraud and error is a huge cost to governments. And we have to think about that, and we have to develop the protocols of this. But we've got to get ahead of it. And a final thought is, actually in the EU, we've made a mess of some of this stuff. You know, the whole debate about GM crops, we never got ahead of thinking about the policy and what was acceptable there. We just allowed it to sort of happen, and then we didn't get ahead of it. And I think we need to get ahead of this and think about what are the privacy options, what are the security options, and how we do that. And let's get ahead of it and get to a better answer rather than just relying on, you know, responding to the crisis.
Thank you, Richard. I'm getting a lot of questions. Thank you very much, and I will ask them. Trust me, so please continue to ask questions. But I just wanted to end this little first round. Turning to you, Isabelle Falk-Pierrotin, you are president of the CNIL. Maybe in one word you could just explain to our auditors what is the CNIL, because French people know it, but maybe it's not very well known in the world. Not yet, not enough anyway. And how do you react to these problems as an agency that are getting that are being faced by governments and local authorities, and what is the border between protecting citizens and making them exploit all these huge opportunities?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. So I'm going to speak on behalf of the French Data Protection Authority, the CNIL, and also maybe a little bit on behalf of the European Data Protection Authority, because I'm also chairing the Working Party 29, which is the network of the European privacy authorities. How do I react? I think I share most that has been said, because in fact, it is common to say that privacy on one hand and security on the other hand are separate. But it's not true. If we want to build a sort of robust digital environment, we need to develop at the same pace security and privacy. And it is in the, I would say, DNA of the privacy authorities to have concerns on privacy, on security, sorry. And for instance, in the inspection that we are conducting at the CNIL level every year, roughly 500, we have, let's say, 85% of this inspection in which we have a question related to security and in which we're going to have legal orders related to security. And when you say the sort of basic culture of security doesn't exist, it is exactly the same statement that we're doing at the CNIL level. We don't have a sort of cultural general culture of security within the company and within the public entities also. And I would say that the action of the supervisory authorities are very complementary, I would say, to the action on security led by our big security agencies. Because we have in all our countries big security agencies. In France we have the ANSSI. And these people are very efficient, but they are efficient towards very large companies, towards critical infrastructure. Or what we see now is that the security has to be ensured by each little levels, from the individuals to the subcontractors to the controllers, you know, so the security is global or there is no security. And so to have this global security, you need to address each levels, each little bricks of this security. And the data protection authorities are discussing with the general public, with the SMEs, with a large variety of actors. So I think our action in security is not so much known, but it's a very critical action if we want to build this robust digital environment. And I would react to the last speaker by saying that I really believe that by combining privacy and security, we can help the growth, the digital growth. We can help building something that is more robust because that is integrated rather by design, the security and the privacy considerations. So there is a huge field for innovation, for new developments by doing this. So I guess it's not against the innovation. On the contrary, I believe it helps innovation to do this.
Just another question. If we turn back to what Jacob Bunsgaard told us about what is happening in Denmark, do you have the feeling that in France, for instance, or in Europe in general, young people are well educated on this problem? Should we do more again in France or in other countries that you can manage?
No, I think probably young people are more aware of the question of security, but the level of education on this issue is not high enough. And we have been several actors in France to create a kind of collective group in order to insist on the need to have a digital education in order for all the actors to integrate security and confidentiality reflexes, I would say. And this digital education has made progress, but we're not at the right level in France, and I'm afraid in other countries too.
Thank you very much. I'm turning to you, Christophe Steck from Telefonica. You are Director of Public and Public Policy, and Internet. Just before asking you the question, if it's possible to give the answer of the Wisambly, because I think you will have something to say about these results of the questions. No? If you could put... No, more. Not yet? No? Okay, we have a digital problem. Brilliant, thank you. So, you see why I was turning to you. It's not that we are not convincing people in this, but they don't trust at the time, for the time being, the security of Internet of Things. So you can all see these results. Christophe, I'm turning to you because this is the point we spoke about. People don't trust at the time being what is happening.
Yes, I think that's very right, and I mean I can just follow on Isabel. I mean that's definitely true. I mean there is a crisis of trust and of digital confidence, and we clearly see that people are not trusting. I mean, here in the room, 80% say they don't trust the government. I mean, if you would believe in the security of IoT in general, I think it might be a similar number or a little bit less, I don't know, but it will be a big majority of you. So I think we have this trust and problem. And I think clearly, to a certain degree, this is just based on also, what we've seen in our experience. I mean, when we just look at the headlines of the last months, I mean, we have countless occasions where things have gone really wrong. I mean, WannaCry, and then we had the Macron campaign being hacked. Then we had, other issues from companies where data has been stolen. The US government has lost a lot of data. I mean, all the personal data about employees of the US government was hacked and stolen. And so I think we see that there is a reason why people say, well, I mean, I don't feel really safe and secure in this digital world. And I believe that we have, I mean, we have to tackle that in a way to be honest that to a certain degree there cannot be 100% security. I mean, if someone tells you there's 100% security for anything, even if it's you know, two steps identification or anything, I mean, it's not true. I mean, it can be, of course, you know, hacked. There are ways to do that, and it just takes maybe more time. But if people are really, really willing to get into something, I mean, usually they can do that. There was a funny case just in Italy where a famous company for cybersecurity was actually hacked by hackers. That was a little bit of kind of sports, you know, to make fun of them. But I mean, it's true that it can happen. So what does that mean? And I think it's maybe, I mean, let's be honest, it's also not so bad, because we also accept that we get into a car, and I mean, though cars are today much more safer than they have been maybe 20 years ago, still it is a car, and it can have an accident, and you can have major injuries, and we accept that as a risk of our everyday life. We have to maybe accept a similar thing for the digital sphere. So what can be done? I think we have to be prepared for the worst. I think that's maybe the way to deal with that. I mean, we have to kind of deal with worst case scenarios. We have to know that incidents can happen, and then companies, governments, everyone who's really involved has to work together to make things, you know, to get the best outcome possible. That will mean, you know, that people are transparent when things happen. It means cooperation. It means kind of pre-established mechanisms. And I think that's the way forward. And that's actually what, for example, here in Europe, when you look at the NIST directive, which is the directive for critical infrastructure, is exactly happening. I mean, governments basically did regulations saying that you have to inform immediately about serious incidents. Because actually to take a company, well, maybe everyone, I mean, government as well, it's not a nice thing to be honest about these issues. I mean, it looks like you have not done your homeworks when things happen and go wrong. So I think we have to get a new culture of, you know, people being aware that, hey, that can happen. It can happen to everyone, and we have to work together in the moment when it happens to make things happen. And I believe that the best way to do that is to, you know, get the ones who can help, which are, you know, governments, of course, administrations, specialized agencies maybe, but also companies, of course, big companies especially, together and try to solve issues when they arise.
Please, Diego, this was one of my first questions I wanted to ask you, because we have the chance to have representatives from governments and from companies, private companies. How can they work together? Maybe it was the thing you wanted to comment.
Well, actually, I wanted to emphasize on one point that I just heard. We also need to get over, especially with government entities, with this culture of non-disclosure. I mean, we're going towards regulation for which it's mandatory to disclose, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But still, I've seen departments and agencies and software houses owned by the government who simply did not want to disclose the bugs because they saw that as a weakness. And it's an amazingly, I would say, stupid approach. It's unhealthy. And the point related to this is, I've seen the Dutch model. I'm sure that other countries are doing it the same. There is a very interesting way to cultivate the hackers community, the ethical hackers community, through responsible disclosure programs. And again, that would be a very helpful activity if regulated by the government. Today, unfortunately, at least in my own government, responsible hackers actually are at the risk of going to jail because the regulation today say if you breach something, even for good reasons, I am obliged to report you to the authorities. So, and there are governments that have been able to change that to facilitate the use of responsible disclosure as a mean to decrease the level of penetration.
You wanted to react, Isabel, because this is something you are dealing with every day.
I just wanted to say that in the new European legal framework, this question of obligation to notify the breach will be, there won't be any choice left. Because now it's an obligation only for the telcos. When they have a breach, they need to notify the breach to the supervisory authorities and in some cases to the individuals concerned. But this obligation will be enlarged to all the data controllers, public and private, whatever the field, whatever the sector. So they will have to notify the breach. And the question is, of course, under what conditions, you know? And the work in Party 29 now is producing, publishing, preparing guidelines on these notification data breach in order to find a balance between transparency, but also between respecting the interest of the entities concerned. because you don't want to notify anything. You know, so you need to have an analysis of this breach and to find the right balance between transparency and keeping the interest of the entity.
Maybe it's the good time to ask the second whistleblower pool. If we could put it on the screen, please. As you could imagine, we knew what you would answer in the first questions. So what is the first thing government should do to help build trust or rebuild trust in the Internet of Things? Stronger rules on data privacy and ownership, enforce global technical standards for IoT devices and networks, slow down innovation of IoT technology, or establish rules for drones. If you could please answer these questions. And I'm turning back to my first question about the fact that companies, private companies now are working very closely with government. And I want us to be very practical so that everybody can learn of what is happening in your countries. What can companies do to work in good intelligence with local authorities or governments? Please answer, Richard, if you want to.
First of all, we do have an education issue. You know, we can talk about two-step authentication. We can talk about, you know, dealing with phishing emails. You know, there is a challenge of how we deliver that. Now, we should build it into stuff at the school, but we have a legacy problem that, you know, most of the human fleet are no longer at schools. And I think that one of the challenges is how do we teach people all of these capabilities on, you know, dealing with the phishing email, not opening this stuff. And I think increasingly companies, as large employers, have a role to play in that. And it's good for the company because it stops the company being hacked. And it's also good for the delivery of that training. So we should think through how companies can, as organizations, deliver some of that stuff. I think on this issue about disclosure, there may be a lesson here from the airline industry. Airline pilots who have problems, misses or whatever, have a confidential disclosure thing that is done in a way that there isn't blame. And I think the risk that we have at the moment is that we'll go to something, people will be embarrassed by it and it'll cause that, and people won't be as disclosing as much as they could do. So I'm wondering whether we shouldn't learn from how the airline industry does it and try and establish some mechanisms by which we can have much more confidential disclosure quickly as well. And maybe longer term, you have to do the full disclosure, because if you've been hacked and you haven't closed the door, or other people haven't closed the door, you really don't want necessarily to get out there that week and tell everyone that there's an open door. So I think that there is a question about how we can decide protocols and think about how some of that might work.
Sorry, I was just going to say that it would be interesting to answer the question, to ask that 5% of people before who said they actually do trust their governments to do IoT right. There should be 5 people that should tell us who they are.
I'll give time for people to ask questions, so maybe they will denounce themselves if they trust everything. How do you work with these private companies? I'm sorry to ask you, but it's very important because you cannot do anything on public side.
No, obviously, when we're pushing to reap some of the benefits of digitalization, we obviously need to, in our tendering processes and in our cooperation with companies, to address this issue of internet security. And we try to do that, but I mean, it just becomes increasingly important because I mean, with the Internet of Things, you're going to have so many devices connected to the internet that the information that they are sending is a major security issue. Some of them are not that important. So there's also different levels of security here. For instance, most of the data that we collect, we try to give back to the community through an open data platform. But obviously, you need to have very, very strong procedures in the process of disclosing this type of data. And we had issues in the past where we weren't vigilant enough and by accident disclose some information that shouldn't have been out there. So you need processes of rinsing the data that are being put out there, and you also need to consider the different levels of security, because the very personal information, health information, and stuff like that needs to be a very, very high security. Information from sensors in our roads and in our libraries and whatever we're using this type of sensor technology. That's not so important. So you also need to address the different levels of security.
Christoph, for example, what's Telefonica doing with governments? It's not here to make any publicity, but what is your company, what can you do or help these authorities to do?
Yes, we can, hopefully, and we do. I mean, Isabel has said it's not just by pure because we're good people and good companies. I mean, it's because there's regulation saying that we have to cooperate openly and freely and say that we have there's an incident or something like that. There's also more regulation, of course, regulation which tries to prevent things. And of course, if you run a critical infrastructure like a telecommunication network, energy grid, or whatever you might think about, it's something that, you know, maybe your data get encrypted on your computer, a personal computer, which is a big hassle. Something else if the energy grid stops working, or suddenly there's no communication more in this country. I mean, these are serious issues where there would be definitely life in danger and there would be death and so on. So I mean, that's a different scale of risk. So therefore, I suppose that throughout our history, we have been aware that there is a big responsibility. There has been always close coordination, not just in the last years, I mean, for a long time going back with government administrations. There is, I mean, just to give small examples, I mean, every antenna mast set up in the city for sure has a regulation, you know, how it needs to be protected, that it's not easily accessible, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's all, of course, thought through for years. This is not something we're doing since yesterday. So I suppose that we are quite aware. The problem is exactly like Isabel said, that now everything becomes digital. We have now cars which have more codes than your smartphone in your pocket, and that's, I mean, that's I read it the other day. I was surprised myself, but apparently a modern car has more lines of codes than an iOS or Android smartphone operating system. So these are amazing things, because suddenly you have everyday things becoming smart and complex. And how are we going to kind of secure that? That's the IoT question about security, and that's the big challenge going forward.
I have a lot of questions regarding the energy systems. It's interesting to see that people are worried about this. I give you this question: what disruption from digitalization on the energy sector, and how can we protect our energy systems? Is there a concrete example, Isabelle?
Yeah, I think it's a concrete example on the possibility to cooperate between public and private entities, because, for instance, in France, on the smart grids, we started to work with the the trade and the industry representative 2 years ago, because these people were quite concerned about the fact that they were setting smart grids in all the homes, the French homes, and that they were raising a kind of fear in all these homes, because of course these smart grids could catch a lot of information about the everyday life of the family. And so they contacted us to work with them on different scenarios to build something that would be privacy friendly. And so we worked with them for 2 years. It was almost the first time that we were experiencing to have this privacy by design session with an industry in particular, and we elaborated a kind of compliance pack on the smart grids, which was very interesting for the industry, of course, but also for us, because it allowed the smart grids to be developed in France with respect with the privacy principles. So for me, it's a very good example that has been repeated in France with the automated cars. We have several examples of such partnerships, it's a very good examples that show that we won't be able to find robust solutions, and I would say even rules, if we don't partner between public and private actors, because the solutions are at the corner of these partnerships. And so I strongly believe that it's needed to do this, yes, and it works.
Thank you, Isabel. And this energy question, someone wanted to add something? No? I have no, please, Diego, please.
I'm sorry, because I think I haven't answered your question before. So, I mean, I just want to add something because, I mean, we have, of course, we have what we call rapid response teams in the company. So they work in specific centers. I mean, we operate in Europe and Latin America, so we have 3 of them around the world, and they are in contact then with national cybersecurity centers, which are national points of contact. They again have contacts with others in other countries. So there is a whole kind of network of cybersecurity, I think, woven into already at least the European ecosystem, but also with I suppose contacts to other countries. So there is of course something already working and up and working. So information about these incidents spread quickly, and people are specialized in dealing with them.
Thank you.
The point I was going to make actually applies to energy system companies as to any other critical infrastructure companies, which is, in the case we just mentioned, they're all receivers of millions of lines of code written by someone else. They basically do integrate systems. And therefore, the most sophisticated energy companies, and I do believe there needs to be some sort of overarching point here, which is they need to be the certifiers of the software they receive, and they need to be responsible of the mistakes in the line of codes. They need to apply the highest possible standards. It's that's the point. And you know, smart cars, I don't remember the exact numbers. I mean, but there are tens of millions of lines of code written by hundreds of different software developers or software companies. I mean, to get to the point, you can automate as much as you can in terms of mistake prevention, but the most sophisticated mistake prevention software line of code mechanisms still reduces, like, I believe, 4 mistakes every 1,000 or 10,000, I forgot the denominator, lines of code. Multiply that when the denominator is billions, I mean, the number of mistakes are going to be still in the several thousands.
Richard, you wanted to comment on this?
I think there's another dimension we haven't touched on yet, and that's particularly the energy systems is where it's one of the areas of exposure, and that's the state-sponsored hacker. You know, this is not just about protecting a system from a teenager in a bedroom. This is how we develop robustness against hackers who have been trained by the best hackers in the world, you know, within Russia or within North Korea or China or whatever. And I think that's a real challenge. And I think the risk of a hacker based somewhere taking down a chunk of the US power grid system that will result in, you know, people dying is a non-trivial risk, non-zero risk. We're going to have to think through how we build in that. And that's where it comes back to, yes, we need to make sure that Microsoft doesn't allow software, you know, doesn't stop doing updates on software, and software updates happen automatically and things like that. You know, it's odd that you know, you have to opt in for software updates, but we also are going to have to realize that this is now a game that's being played at the highest intergovernment level, and we have to have the people in government, the GCHQ equivalents, the people who are the masters of this, have to find a way of working with the private sector on that, and that requires a different model. And I think there's some interesting ideas there. So, for instance, the UK GCHQ realised that GCHQs sit behind barbed wire fences, are not accessible, but they've created a cybersecurity centre which connects into GCHQ, but it's based in Victoria, and companies can go there and work with them or whatever. It's to make it more accessible, because we've got to make that link. We have to take the governmental work and work it into the private sector.
Which brings us to this very important question you started to answer. What can we do with critical hackers? And more specifically, can we say that there are good hackers and bad hackers, and how do we treat them? So huge philosophical questions, but
I will take that in memory of my colleague who's our kind of chief data officer, he's called, and he calls himself a hacker. So and he looks like a hacker, to be honest, with a hat on and so on. So people are always shocked when he gets up and says, "I'm from Telefonica and I'm a hacker," and everyone goes like, "Oh." And so he says, "No, I'm not a cyber criminal." You know, so that's a difference. So I suppose, I mean, these are cybersecurity professionals, and some of them, I mean, they might work in a different way, but we have, again, to go back to WannaCry, I mean, we've seen that it was stopped or at least kind of limited by someone, you know, finding a weak link in the coding. So there is, of course, you know, white hat hackers and the bad ones and so on, and they work together. The big risk here, and that's one of the issues I think we have to be aware about, is that there are not enough people who know about that. I mean, there are actually very few. So there are various studies showing that there are worldwide, I don't know, 1 million, 1.5 million cybersecurity professionals missing. And I mean, imagine that we now speak about expanding it to all kind of devices, all kind of companies, small and medium enterprise. I mean, there's going to be a massive need for experienced people and educated people in that field. And that's something for governments to think about as well.
So the answer is absolutely yes. I have no doubt, and I'm a big believer that those kind of programs needs to be incentive. Also because governments, and again, I'm always giving the government point of view, do not have enough competence in-house. There's no way. I mean, you can't develop programs unless you get, you cannot develop inside programs unless you can coordinate the activity of people. Obviously, you need to select them. You need to double background check them. But there's no doubt that there is something there that can be very useful to facilitate. And we should also, I mean, think doing random penetration tests on government websites or in critical websites, those needs to be organized. And you need competence to do that, and cannot just be, there need to be competence built inside the government, cannot just be always outsourced.
Please, Jacob, you wanted to comment.
Just a perspective from a municipality. The city of Aarhus is like 335,000 people. So, I mean, in level of competencies, we're not able to play at the level where states are involved. But we have an organization of municipalities in Denmark that has a where we sort of have a common tendering process and stuff like that. So you do sort of through networks get the ability to have a critical mass or scale that you can actually interact with some of these huge companies that are providing the software that we need. But this needs to be done on a national level in order for this to be effective, because you cannot leave it to individual department or individual municipality. You really need a critical mass in order to have the right focus and the right level of competency.
If we can turn back to the Weissenbly question, because it's a good moment to give the answers that you gave. Thank you for answering this question. So as you see, the most for people listening to us, the most important is to enforce global technical standards for IoT device and networks, more than rules. Which brings me to one question someone had here. Sorry, I just have to go back. The question was on blockchain. What is the role of new technology such as blockchain in rebuilding trust? And it's a good question because blockchain, not everybody is familiar with it, but it's designed to be normally security proof. Do you have started to think about blockchain in your countries? Isabel, maybe you have?
Yes, we've started to think about it. I'm not sure I totally have understood what is blockchain. I've been explained several times, and I have understood the sort of general idea, which is trust and build in a sort of a network approach instead of having one centralized place from which the trust and the certification of trust is issued. But having said that, it's more difficult to see the practical effect and uses of this blockchain. And at the CNIL, we started in our technology laboratory to investigate about what are the real questions behind the blockchain. But yes, I think it's very full of hopes, but at this stage I would be cautious.
Christophe and Jacob.
Well, I think blockchain is not a very intuitive concept, so I mean, don't feel bad because you haven't understood it immediately, because I think that's happening to most of us. Having said that, I think it is, I mean, the internet has created this amazing space of communication. I mean, basically permissionless innovation. People can communicate to each other without, you know, any big kind of entry barriers, and has created all this kind of wave of innovation we've seen. The problem is that, you know, security is not built into the internet. I mean, the internet is not built as a secure system. It is built as an open system and an interconnected system. So to a certain degree, how I see blockchain is that it can give this kind of level of trust and security to the internet, because in the end it's a decentralized technology which can be used to basically make any transaction in whatever form, a digital transaction, being retraceable, transparent, and also secure. Let's not get into details how it works because it's complicated. But I mean, I think in the end, most people here also would not know how an IP protocol works exactly. So I mean, we still use it every day, and we're happy that that we believe it is working. So maybe something similar would happen. So I think it's one of the general purpose technologies coming up, which might help a lot with these issues. Another one might be encryption, for example. I mean, so there are a couple of technology innovations which are coming up.
Just we have a question on encryption, but Jacob, you wanted to comment on
just
blockchain?
a small point, because sort of the philosophy behind blockchain. I mean, I'm quite convinced that it will be sort of a means for authenticating transactions in the future, but in a very broad use. But the sort of philosophy or the thinking behind it is how can we use different types of communities to help also in terms of creating more security in protecting our data, and that can be definitely be utilized. I mean, we do it in very small scale in terms of sort of sponsoring different types of hacks where people come together to create new solutions to some of the issues that we are facing in our everyday life as a municipality and as a citizen in Aarhus. But this can also be applied for security, and people want to contribute. So there are people out there wanting to contribute to this if we create the right kind of platform and set the agenda.
Please, Richard, you wanted.
I think we also have to be careful, though. Blockchain will not solve things like phishing. You know, if you get a phishing email and it comes from someone else's email, I mean, it can check whether the emails come from someone who said it is. But if someone else's email has been hacked and it sends out a phishing link, you know, you click on that link and it puts some software on your computer. Blockchain and other types of stuff won't do it. So, you know, we mustn't assume that there's some silver bullet going to come along through new encryption technologies or blockchain or whatever, and not remember that the biggest problem with most security is the individual, not the machine. And we have to remember to work the machine, the human side as well, and not rely on some technology to come in and address everything.
But artificial intelligence can help there. I mean, you can have artificial intelligence programs installed on your computer is going to tell you there is a 98% chance this email is fake. So again, let's not forget, the problems are getting more and more complicated, but thanks God, the technology is going to help with the solutions in a much better way than we can think of. So there is always that positive, negative, right level of balance.
You spoke about encryption. This is a very important subject. It's another way to protect ourselves on the technological side. But all the governments are thinking about it. Till where can they go? Is it a good idea, or is it still something difficult to manage until the end? I mean, could it be the solution to all the problems that we have? Isabelle, yes. You were looking at me, it's your fault.
Thank you for the question. I think there is a temptation to consider that encryption could be an obstacle to have access to the data in a situation where the access to these data is particularly needed. So in all our countries, there has been debate that encryption was against the government's interest and also the people's interest, because it was an obstacle to security somehow. And with the privacy authorities, we have discussed this subject a lot, and you can imagine that our discussions were very difficult, because who could be against this type of debate, you know, in the situation that we have? But the position that we elaborated is, I would say, a rather balanced position. We said that encryption is a key lever for security. I mean, everybody knows that encryption is a very good measure to ensure security and of the exchanges. Second, we said that if we are to set backdoors in all the softwares, because sometimes encryption, as I said, is an obstacle to access to the data, it will endanger the security of the whole system, maybe with a short-term benefit, but for sure with a long-term deficit of security, because if you have a backdoor for governments, of course this backdoor can be used by anyone. And so you endanger the security of the whole system. So the systemic effect of your backdoor is really negative. And third, what we said with the privacy community is that, of course, we need to have legal framework in all our countries in which cooperation between industry players and governments is needed, in which access to data and to metadata should be organized. And for instance, in France, we already have a lot of means to have access to the data in case it's to fight against terrorism. So for these are the general, I would say, lines that we adopted for a position on encryption. But it was not an easy position, I would say.
Do you share this position? Do you think it's a good equilibrium or not?
Well, in general lines, I think it's a fair position. I think encryption is not the silver bullet. It's not the one solution for everything. It's not blockchain, it's the one solution for anything. I mean, before in one debate someone said, you know, populism is you know, the perception to give answers, easy answers to complicated issues. And I think cybersecurity is a complicated issue. There's no easy answer. There's not one, you know, thing you have to do. There's a lot of things we have to do. And so I think encryption is one of these tools which can be very helpful for privacy, which can help a lot. Having said that, there is of course, you know, also downsides, like with everything. I mean, it's, for example, encryption is much more burdensome on your devices. It's much more burdensome on your network. It's more difficult to manage things. And then there's a huge security debate, of course, about a very specific part of encryption, which is not everything, which is maybe not recoverable encryption, you might call it. I mean, the case with Apple in the United States, or encryption of some messaging services, which basically is not even readable anymore for the company offering the service. And basically, like, you know, you give the key to the customer, and the customer swallows it, and that's it. I mean, you cannot do anything about it. So, and that's, of course, I mean, we have to debate then the consequences of that, and I think that's what's going on currently. Of course, backdoors are not a solution for it. I mean, that's for sure.
I'm going to turn to the audience just so that you can ask questions. Maybe time you are thinking about it. I have just one general question. Sorry if you find it too general or kind of stupid, but I think it's important. Who should be in charge of cybersecurity at the end of the day? Is it the government? Is it specialized agencies? Private firms, an army. In France, we are creating a new army regarding cybersecurity. I'm sure you will answer everybody, of course, but if you say this, it might give the idea that everybody is in charge, and at the end of the day, nobody is in charge to protect the citizen.
I can try to answer. I think it's the point is that depends of what kind of security aspects you're talking about, right? If you think about the pyramid of a hierarchy of needs, and the basic, you know, training things is something that is probably a combination of government and private companies or even universities and others. And then depending on all the way up to the top of the pyramid, where you get into, work cybersecurity related influence of governments and everything, that has to be done obviously by government agencies, even secret government agencies. So it all depends of which aspects of security you are referring to. The point here, though, that I want to make is that it must be very clear that, especially now that all those governments needs to be very careful in terms of the spending review, respect the deficit limits and everything, it would be really crazy to save on security. And that is the point that I'm trying. I mean, if I see the resources that Italian privacy agency has, maybe in France you're much richer, it's abysmal. They're doing a gigantic job with a handful of people, and that's the areas where, and again, in terms of spending, there should be. I mean, this is really the typical example of being penny wise and pound foolish. That's what you say. That's the point. So
Please, Jacob.
I agree. Just a small point of reflection. I mean, this the cybercrime is the fastest rising crime in any country right now. So obviously this needs to be addressed and also needs to be funded, because it does. I mean, in terms of I mean, spending your resources wisely, this is a good place to spend it in many ways in order to make sure that the criminals behind the cybercrimes are I mean prosecuted and investigated.
Yes, please, and then we have questions.
Well, I think, I mean, it's the same with security in general. I mean, who's responsible for traffic security? I mean, is it the car manufacturer who builds a kind of safer car? Is it the government doing, regulation that you have to put on your safety belt? Is it you as a driver who is not allowed or shouldn't drink? I mean, it's difficult. I mean, saying that everyone is responsible means no one, and I agree. So maybe the response to that would be the ones who need to be involved, which means that the ones who know what's going on, the ones who have experience, that means bigger companies working in this area, it means government, it means researchers, it means the good hackers, the ethical hackers and so on. So these people need to be in a constant interchange of work and need to kind of try to make sure that things work better. But it's, as I said, it's one of these complex issues where you cannot say that's the one or that's the easy way. I mean, it is like with life. We accept that there are risks in our life, and we have to accept that there are risks in our digital life as well. And it needs to be a process which is going to change a lot over the next years, and hopefully we can keep up with this speed.
Isabelle, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, just to add to, I mean, this is typically a kind of problem in which all of us, all of the actors, public actors, industry representative, general public, each of us, we have a part of the solution. And the only way to tackle the problem is that each of these actors bring their part of the solution. And for that, we need to have a global, I would say, design, a global strategy. So this is probably the responsibility of the public actors to offer, to propose the global strategy in terms of security, in saying our global objective would be to do this. And then the industry people, the end users, the public authorities, specific or general, will bring their part of the solutions. So I think it's the way we can really view, I would say, the subject.
Just related to that, I think there's a really important point of setting expectations on each of the individual players, what they need to do. So, we need to be telling the citizen, you have as much of a responsibility to learn basic cybersecurity as you have a responsibility to learn how to use the lock on your house. And we need to have political leaders telling people, learn this basic stuff. Learn how to detect a phishing email. If you have an artificial intelligence engine on your email, read the message that comes up. Most people don't when they get a message saying there's something wrong with this. They try and bypass it or whatever. So, we need to set the expectations. We need the expectations on the software companies. It's not enough to stop issuing updates. on a software to say we're no longer updating a software. So we need to set those expectations for the different players and be quite explicit on that, because we're not at the moment.
I think we have questions over there. I don't know who was the first, Mr. and then you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
hello. It was a good remark that you have the cyber attack dissection in your army. In Germany, the same thing is happening for the moment as well. And I think it's quite a critical topic that we should take into account or be aware of. And I would like to know, because we had before in the other room a discussion about digitalization and what are the challenges or what are the barriers and what are the challenges. So what do you think, like you said, it's up to the everybody of ourselves is, how to say it, we are involved, so it's up to our responsibility to know how to use this technology, but how to set up something like OECD on a more global level, not because you are neutral, but which kind of organization would like to place or bring into, bring around?
On a subnational level, you mean supranational? Sorry. Yeah. Good, excellent question. Who wants to answer this one? Isabel, maybe. Europe? No, Europe.
To plead for Europe, but in this forum, maybe it's a bit awkward. But
no, but is it Europe as a political, or can we imagine a specific organization? Maybe it exists already.
Yeah, I mean, there is ENISA in Europe. I think in Europe there are things happening already, but Europe is not the world. I mean, it's just one part. I mean, I would say that we have people, you know, kind of taking care of our security every day. Authorities doing it. And maybe as our lives become digital, maybe these people should also know how about to protect us in the digital sphere. I'm not saying that, you know, ENISA has not a great role to play, coordinate and to do best practices sharing and other things as well, but I believe that, I mean, there are people, Europol or whoever, I mean, and they are already, as our military branches as well, getting into this kind of cyber, because it's life itself now, it's our life, it's our world. So maybe there's no need for a new agency or something like that, because actually, I mean, if you look at international politics, maybe that's not really what we will get in a very short time. But maybe what we need is that, you know, the existing mechanisms kind of get smarter in using, basically getting adapted to the digital world. And maybe what we could also do, and that's maybe the difference to other parts, I think there's a big role for the private sector to play, and for especially bigger players in the private sector. And that's what I mean with a multi-stakeholder engagement. I think there are good examples on national levels, for example, in Germany about, it's called an Alliance for Cybersecurity. And I think something like that you can create. I mean, there is, as Isabel said before, there's an interest by everyone that these things work. I mean, by companies, by governments, by citizens, by the public opinion. So why should we not just come together, you know, by our own kind of motivation and incentive to try to help?
Diego, you want?
So the only thing I want to add to this is that whatever organism we're thinking of, or a combination of organisms, it needs to be clear that it needs to travel with different rules and speed of the typical organizations, whether it's the United Nations or the European Union or the OECD. The point here is speed. And the issues with, if you go to an old style of which it takes you like 12 months to get 27 countries to have a consensus on some specific rules, then you've failed from the beginning. So this needs to be a completely out-of-the-box approach, which has probably not been thinking. So the good thing is that somehow the overall multi-stakeholders activity of private companies, public, whatever, something is doing and something is happening. So that's the good part. We just need to make sure that we don't make that part worse by creating something that blocks the innovation that happens.
You want to just?
maybe just to react on the question of speed, because I think it's we're always told that we need to be quick. Regulators, legislators, they have to be quick. But on the other hand, when you see within the companies the time it takes to set the proper data governance or security governance, let's be realistic. It takes a lot of time to change the mindsets, to change the processes, to change the way the people are working with each other. So I guess in any case, it will take time to do this. And we have to integrate the fact that it will take time.
We have another question over there. Yes, madam, and then here, please.
Malavika from the Digital Asia Hub, Hong Kong. I had a quick question about approaches and tools. I was wondering, a lot of the solutions to security problems end up invading people's fundamental rights on many levels, you know, whether it's privacy or autonomy or control, choice, a lot of things. So do you actually have hope for any new tools or technology that actually helps solve security issues without making inroads into people's private space? Thank you. Or, you know, starting from a place of suspicion and the solution being that you surveil everyone to find the few bad actors. Thank you.
I think it's a question for you also, Isabel, but Richard, you wanted to answer.
Well, so an example, it's not going to solve everything, but the UK government's developing a public service DNS, domain name service. So all over time, instead of going to a private sector DNS, they will go to this public sector one. And that is going to be able to link into the, you know, the people who are fighting this fifth arena war. I mean, war has moved to the fifth arena. I mean, we had earth, land, sea, air, space. We're now in cyber. I mean, this is now where war is going to be fought, and we're going to have to build digital armies. But you can design ways so that the insights coming from that team can be used to drive things like a, you know, public server DNS that allows you to rapidly switch off sites. It allows you to monitor stuff. It allows you, if things have been hacked, you can actually redirect some of the messages coming from the programs that have been hacked. So there are a lot of benefits of that. Now, you know, that type of thing doesn't infringe much on people's privacy. So there are a lot of answers, and I think sometimes we have to engage on privacies, but a whole bunch of stuff like educating the consumer, educating the citizen, putting in place a public sector DNS, those types of things don't actually do that. So I think that we need to be careful that we say that it's always difficult for the consumer's privacy.
Well, answer the question in the abstract is really, really hard. I mean, there's a technology, I mean, the answer is situational on technologies. The point I want to make, though, is that I do sincerely hope that the next big technological innovation about security is simplicity. I mean, today, it is one of the reasons, and we go back to the initial comments, why people don't follow rules, they don't follow the steps they need to be following because it's boring and complicated. And so far, for many different reasons, technological innovation in terms of easy user interface has just not happened to security. And I do hope that this is an area where, you know, the next easy user interface will start happening because of being such a pervasive problem.
Just a small comment there. I mean, in my view, there's also a tremendous opportunity for citizens' empowerment in creating an understanding or raising the competencies at the level of the ordinary citizens to understand what is actually going on. Because one thing is the type of information that are misused or exploited because there has been a breach or a hack. Another thing is that, I mean, tons of personal information that the ordinary citizens are giving away at their own free will because they don't necessarily understand the implications of the information that they're disclosing to private companies. So if you can actually raise the awareness also on that issue, there is an empowerment that can actually give the citizens the opportunity to make a informed decisions on whether to disclose personal information or not.
A question over there, and then there is a comment. I think we all agree backdoors are damaging. I don't know if we all agree, but it's an interesting comment. Please.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Mitch, and I'm an independent consultant, and I'm also CEO of a company in aviation supply chain. I have a question about the cybersecurity, specifically in finding people who are brilliant enough, like who work at Apple and Google and whatnot, because usually they earn great salaries, and so it's quite hard to encourage people to work in government where the salaries are kind of flatlining, so to speak. And under the Obama administration, they had encouraged and created this program to get people to work in government. Of course, under the current administration, I think there's been either people who've walked out or whatnot. But I was just kind of curious to see what sort of government incentives to get the best and the brightest, because usually they go where the money is.
Thank you. You were first one, but I think everybody has an opinion. Yeah.
Well, one way to look at that is putting together processes and mechanisms for which people coming from the private world, and let me specify, the good people coming from the private world, because it's not that everybody working in the private world is good, can give some added value for a limited amount of time. I mean, if I was being asked, come and work for the government for the rest of your life, my answer would have been no. And but one of the things I would like to give as a positive legacy to my job is, how do I create the processes, because it's about process and mechanism for which next people like me, 10, 15, 20, 100, can come and work on something specific. So I'm not saying that's the solution, but it is definitely one approach you can give. How do you create the environment for which people can come and work and do their civil service, giving competence to the government, but it needs to be process supported. It cannot just come there and reinvent the wheel. It needs to be driven by some specific processes.
I actually disagree with what half of your question. Government has no difficulty attracting the most talented people. If you look at most countries around the world and look at the quality of the people they hire from universities, they still are getting the best in many parts of the world, in terms of people joining the government. The challenge is how you get skilled people to want to come to government for a bit of their career. And I think that's exactly how we should think about this. This is no longer the old way where governments would hire people from university, they would work as civil servants for 35 years, they'd end up running departments or whatever. We have to find a different way, and we have to make the membrane between government and the private sector much more permeable both ways. Civil servants need to go out and spend time in the private sector, and people from the private sector need to come to government. And actually, you can make it quite compelling. If you're going off and doing cybersecurity in the UK government, and you're not getting an uplift in your salary at the end of the 5 years you're there, when you go back to the private sector, then something is wrong with your government. Because this is the place that has the tools, the big games. If you're doing procurement, this is similar. You can work on the biggest procurement projects in the world in government. So you can get talented people to come and do this. And part of it is thinking about how that story is. But the real challenge is how you remove this fixed membrane between things and make it permeable and allow people to come backwards and forwards. And that's actually part of the challenge for governments to think about their HR policies in that respect.
Does anyone want to comment, add something about this question? No?
Just a small comment, because I agree completely. One of the things that we experience is that people from the private sector come to work in our IT department because they want a better work-life balance for a while, and then they will go back into the private sector when they don't have small kids or whatever. So you also have some of the differences between the sectors that can actually be used as a benefit.
So we have another question here. Just before you, is there another question? Okay, there will be a last one after. Thank you.
I have to stand up. So Claudine Schmuck, director of a research and consulting firm. You've been explaining actually for all of you the importance of educating people about the cybersecurity and all the issues. But you've mentioned this item in fairly general terms. It would be interesting if you could share some of your experiences, because it seems that it's a very important action to implement. It has been highlighted that it takes time to build regulations, but on this specific item, it seems it could come out of this debate as a powerful action. So if you could share with us some elements on this, thanks.
Richard, yes? And then Richard, please, and Jacob, yeah.
I'm going to give an example, phishing emails, how to cope with those and how to realize that they're companies or institutions or government departments or ministries, whatever. The way to get people used to phishing emails is to start sending them fake phishing emails. And when you click on the thing, and I mean, just as a test, how many have got this? You get the fake phishing email, you click on it, and you get a thing saying you have been phished. Here's a training course you need to do. And people who click on these too often go and it gets reported to their boss. We have to build things like that in now. I mean, obviously school systems or whatever, but that's what you've got to do. It's at that practical level. If that's how you deal with phishing. Other ones you have to do it through rules. I mean, Diego talked earlier about the password protection. The thing should be designed so that if you don't change the password every 3 months, it stops working. You can't leave it with password admin. You have to design that. So there's some aspects of that, but it's lots of little practical things like that.
Yes, I mean, the city of Aarhus is engaged in a number of different networks where we try to share the knowledge that we get from working. And I believe that the community outreach, although it might not be very technical or modern or anything, is actually one of the ways to do it. We've done it on other different types of crime, burglaries and stuff like that. And there's a tremendous interest in the local communities to actually engage themselves in this and getting the knowledge and the competencies to actually act, because the best way of creating a greater sense of security is giving people the tools to actually taking responsibility for their own security. So there's a double bottom line in this, and we try to share our knowledge in the networks that we participate in.
Isabelle, you wanted to ask?
An example in the new European regulation with the PIA, Privacy Impact Assessment, because this is going to be a new obligation for the most critical treatments. And in this PIA, you have an important section on security measures. So this is a way Europe will ensure the security considerations are more seriously taken into account by most of the controllers. And this is going to be implemented within 1 year from now. And as you know, the sanctions, the fines, if it's not respected, will be very high, because it could go until up to 4% of the annual revenue. So this is a practical example to ensure security is taken into consideration by the actors.
We have one last question from you, please.
I happen to be a government official working 25 years with the Ministry of Education, and somehow it strikes me, why is it that we haven't touched upon the issue of, even today, there has been such massive talk about the disruptive effects of what's going on right now. The digitization is going to stay with us for the rest of eternity somehow. I would say the cheapest investment would simply be to make sure that in primary education, at least our children get some basic knowledge about this. Just like in the Netherlands, where I come from, we have all been taught to swim. We know water, we like it, we love it, but we have to make sure that our children know how to swim. And the same thing goes for cybersecurity. I mean, not at a very high level, but it should become part of your natural DNA, isn't it? Anyway.
I think the way you're saying it is absolutely correct. It's impossible to deny that part. It needs to be, but again, it's the same thing about, teaching coding skills at elementary schools and everything. But my point is about, again, training, which is very important, but also in terms to assure security. The most critical thing is to minimize the number of human steps that need to be done. I mean, at the end of the day, it's actually, I do not agree with punishing people if they make mistakes, but it needs to be, the approach needs to be that you don't have to have humans making those mistakes. And that's the point. And again, with technology, the next step is going to be, what is the smallest amount of human steps that needs to be done to allow for security.
Christophe, one word, and then Isabelle, you'll get the final word.
Yeah, no, I 100% in agreement that education is fundamental, awareness raising, all of that. But I think that point is crucial. I think we have to make things also a little bit simpler. I mean, we cannot all have a PhD in cybersecurity to be able to manage, you know, our email systems or whatever we do. So, I mean, things need to be kind of built into systems in a different way. And maybe we're also at the point of time where we'll think about these solutions. Who says, and I'm not a technical person, but that, you know, a phishing email just because you open a program gets access to everything I have on my computer. I mean, you can open things in protected environments. Why is that not built into? It would be easy, you know. So people, I mean, yeah, there will always be people doing something wrong. I mean, there's no way about it. So machines can help, artificial intelligence can help, and maybe there are also other ways we can help people. It needs to be really built into simple ways. So simplicity was really a fantastic keyword for that.
No, just a good news, speaking of education, by saying that the last International Privacy Conference, worldwide referential, had been adopted by all the countries around the table. And so it's a referential for digital education for primary and secondary schools. And from Sweden to Africa to New Zealand to the United States, these people agreed on the content of this referential. And if you see on the website what is the content of this referential, you will see it's very practical. So I would say it's a sign, very positive sign, I would say.
This is the way we will finish on this positive news. Thank you very much, 5 of you, for this very interesting debate. Thank you for your question. It was very short term to speak about such huge subjects. I hope we elaborate enough so that you'll be more curious tomorrow about these questions. Have a good night. I think it's the last session of today OECD Forum, so see you tomorrow morning. Have a good evening in Paris. Bye-bye.